Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Today is Tuesday, May 4th. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting today. Today, we're going to talk about gap closers, and I'm going to define what gap closers are. I'm going to look at the gap closers that Notre Dame has landed in the last couple classes, and then we're going to dive into sort of who those players are in the 2022 class on both sides of the ball, and then where Notre Dame stands with them, and just kind of talk about what would it take for Notre Dame from here on out to finish with that sort of that top 5 class, which is where they are ranked right now, and that kind of class that we look at and say, yeah, that moves the needle. And that's what gap closing is all about. So I'm going to begin by sort of defining more clearly what a gap closer is for me. There's obviously the easy one, which is you're landing an elite player. And to me, an elite player is either someone who is kind of a ready-made step on campus and be impactful right now type of player. And that'd be a Michael Mayer type of player, for example. Kyle Hamilton was that kind of player. Guy's going to step foot on campus and have an impact. Chris Tyree was that kind of player. Then the other type of elite player, in my view, is a guy that has that 5-star upside, and not necessarily the guy that has 5-star upside, but it's going to take him a while to get there, and there's more risk of him actually getting to that point. When I think of, like, in this current class, Darren Agu is a player that I view as a 5-star upside player, but right now there's some space there. So you could debate whether he's a gap closer, even though I gave him a 5-star upside. I'm talking about definitive players that you look at and you say, this guy may not be a 5-star this day he steps foot on campus, or a 4.5-star. To me, both of those are gap closers for me. If you're a top 50 player, you're a gap closer. Blake Fisher's another example. And so then you look at and you say, okay, who are the other types of players? It's a guy like, to me, like a Deion Colsey type, who is to me right now not an elite prospect, but Deion's ceiling is incredibly high to where by the time it's all said and done, he could be a Chase Claypool type of player. And that to me is a gap closer. So we're going to dive into, so then there's a second part of gap closers. That's the immediate, the big impact guy. But I think there's another way to close the gap. And it's not simply just saying you're going to land elite players. The other way you close the gap, in my view, and this is a different type of player, is maybe this isn't an elite prospect, a guy that comes in and he's going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick someday. But the other part of the gap closing is this a player or is this a position group? And we'll dive into that. Is this a position group that moves the needle from where you are right now? So not every gap closer is necessarily a guy that you say he's going to go start at Alabama, okay? Or he's going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. Other types of gap closers can be guys that are, hey, here's where you were as a program and you're not there yet, but this gets you further. This gets you a lot closer. The truly elite Blake Fisher types and the Michael Mayer types, those aren't gap closers. Those are gap erasers, right? I mean, those are the best of the best. And it's unrealistic to say Notre Dame's going to land 9, 10 guys of those a year. But I do think Notre Dame can land at least 9 to 10 gap closers a year when you take both of those definitions into consideration. So let's give a couple of examples. To me, when you look at certain positions and you say, you know, is Gabriel Rubio or is Prince Collie, are those guys that are just the elite future top 10 NFL draft picks? I don't think that they are. They could eventually grow into that, but I don't think they are. They don't necessarily all of a sudden you landed them and now you're right on the same plane as Alabama and Clemson. But what you can look at them and say is these guys get you closer. They get you a lot closer. Then there's the less obvious type of gap closers, and this is where it can be more about a class. So when I look at Ryan Barnes, and I look at Philip Riley, and I look at Chance Tucker, and I look at JoJo Johnson at corner in the current freshman class, are any of those guys individually elite prospects that eventually are going to be top 10 picks? I don't see that right now. Again, anything can happen, but I don't see that right now. What I see, however, is a cornerback class that moved the needle significantly and gets Notre Dame much further down the road than they were before that class showed up. So to me, that is what gap closing is to me. It's 2 tiers. It's the obvious elite players, the guys with really high ceilings, and then it's that next level group of players. And today, we're going to talk about who the gap players are on the roster in the younger classes. and then who the gap closers are that are still on the board. And for right now, it's really important for Notre Dame to get those guys. And then as we go through it, there may be some comments that I pull up or some questions that I react to. But if I don't get to your question during the show, I will definitely get to it when we get to it. And Notre Dame 2164, what's up, buddy? Appreciate you for being on the show, and everybody that's already on the show already. So let's dive into this. Let's first look at the last two recruiting classes. So this is going to be the 2020 and the 2021 classes. And just to show how fast this stuff goes by, I'm not counting the Kyle Hamilton class as part of this. I'm just looking at the last couple classes. The reason I'm doing that is because, to be honest with you, Kyle Hamilton might not be on campus, probably won't be on campus when this group of recruits shows up. If everything goes to plan this year for Kyle Hamilton, he's not in the class. Kyron Williams may not be on the roster when this class shows up. I said class, I meant in on the roster. So I'm looking at the 2020 and 2021 classes. And in 2020, to me, the gap closers there's three obvious ones for me, or two obvious ones for me on offense. And that's Chris Tyree and Michael Mayer. I view Xavier Watts as having that guy, but he's more of that upside type of player that's much more debatable. He has to pan out a lot. Tosh Baker falls into that category. Tosh was a top 50 to 100 caliber recruit, but he's more of a high ceiling guy that needs time to develop. I view Jordan Botelho and Riley Mills are guys that are in that second category of gap closers. Maybe not elite top 50 players, but guys that, to me, move you down the road and get you closer. Not just a little bit, but a jump closer. 2021, there are even more, especially on offense. I have 5 gap closers in the 2021 offensive class. And I have Tyler Buckner. I have Blake Fisher are the obvious top 50 guys. And then I have a view of Deion Colsey and Rocco Spindler and Lorenzo Styles are sort of that second tier of players. And then I talked about Colsey. Colsey could end up being by himself a gap closer. He's got that kind of upside. He's just going to need more time to develop, in my opinion. And on defense, we talked about Rubio and Prince Collie are gap closers. In the 2022 class, let's look at where they are right now. Right now, Notre Dame is ranked 4th among all the services in recruiting. They're ranked 4th by Rivals, and they're ranked 4th by 24/7 Sports. And that's pretty good. But a big part of the reason they're ranked 4th right now is from a volume standpoint. And the way that those things work, it's a accumulation of points, right? Well, Notre Dame has 12 commits. There's not a lot of teams that have 12 commits in their classes right now. So that's a big part of where they're at. And it's a real solid class. And when I look at the class right now, I don't see any traditional gap closers on offense. I don't view Steve Angeli or Jadarian Price as that, or Maureen Walker, or even Eli Raridan. So when I look at Price and Raridan, guys that I rank as top 250 players, and when I look at Joey Tanona, who I rank as a top 250 player, I don't see guys that are necessarily moving the needle along. They're in a different category, and this is a very important category, and that is these are guys that are going to sustain areas where you're already strong, or they're at least keeping you where you are, at worst, keeping you where you are, based on the type of recruits they are right now. So when you say Eli Raridan's not a gap closer because he doesn't make Notre Dame better at tight end than they were, he keeps them already really strong. And it can be confusing, but I think everybody's going to get the hang of it as we talk about this more and more and more. Defensively, I think they've got a lot of gap closers, and I think you could make a case that all of the defensive players fall into one of the two categories, and especially as units. So when you look at the defensive line, Tyson Ford's a top 100 recruit. He's the number 70 player in the country on Rivals board. I rank him as a top 100 recruit. To me, he is a gap closer. There's no question. You are a much better program with him in your system. I view Aiden Gabera after his junior season as being a gap closer. A guy that here's where you were as a program. Now you're better. You're closer to those programs because you have him. And so then the second part of it to me is you look at a guy like Darren Agu, and I talked about him earlier. Is Darren Agu a gap closer today, May 4th? I don't think that he is, but is Darren Agu a gap closer in that if he reaches his full potential, he closes the gap? Yes, he's an Isaiah Foskey type of guy, but not all of those guys pan out, and oftentimes they're not ready to necessarily play as true freshmen. So that's another part of it too. So there are different types of categories. And then I put Jaden Mickey in the gap closer category after his junior season. He went from a top 250 player on my board based on sophomore film to top 150. Now, what I mean by Jaden Mickey is he is in that second group of players, in my opinion. And what I'm referring to, that second tier of players, is he is not a elite top 50, even a top 100 guy yet. He could end up being a top 100 guy if he makes another jump as a senior. But right now he's like that top 150 guy. Well, to me, your cornerback depth chart looks a lot better now that you have Jaden Mickey in it. He's not necessarily just a keeping you where you are. He has moved the needle. And to me, that is that second tier of gap closing. So that is where Notre Dame's class is right now. Now, when you look at where they have to be at the end of the year, Notre Dame has often been in the top 5 early in the process. And part of that is because they get a lot of commits early. And in recent years, they've especially had success. Remember, early last year, for a while, Notre Dame had the number 1 class in the entire country. But over time, as other schools started to land high-ranked players and other schools started to catch Notre Dame in numbers and surpass Notre Dame in numbers, they passed them. And Notre Dame finished with the top 8 class. And then in the past years, which is still really good, they finished like about the 8th or 9th class, which is still really good. But then in past years, they would kind of fall out of the top 10. So when I look at the class now, there's 2 things to discuss. Number 1 is who's on the board. And then number 2, can they close? As I mentioned in a previous podcast, I think I might have mentioned it in maybe yesterday's podcast, the day before. They all kind of bleed. No, it was in the Eli Raridan podcast, I believe. But I said I'm more confident today in Notre Dame's ability to close based on where they've positioned themselves than I was last year, than I was the year before, and then the year before that. In regards to they're in a position to, yeah, they've got great guys on the board, but it's more about can you get those players to then kind of finish off and close off with those type of prospects. And that's where I view Notre Dame. So let's first start on offense. To me, when I look at the offensive recruiting, let's start up front. Now, the one position that I think you have to always look at and say, this isn't necessarily about landing an elite prospect. It's more so about landing an elite class, an elite group. And the reason I say that is when you look at the NFL draft, there's always teams that have a great offensive lineman that don't necessarily have great offensive lines. That's not always the case, obviously, but that tends to happen quite a bit. I mean, we've seen players go in the first couple rounds of the NFL draft that weren't part of great offensive lines. For example, Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. I mean, I don't think Virginia Tech had a great offensive line, even though he was a part of it. Rashawn Slater was not part of a great offensive line at Northwestern. He went in the first round. Elijah Vera Tucker was a first-round guard from USC. I don't think USC had a great offensive line, but they were obviously high-level individual players. What is more important to me is to get them to where you have an elite group. And so when I look at Notre Dame's class, I think what I look at and say with the offensive line is it's about finishing with that elite group. Right now, with where they are, I don't view them as being there, but I do believe they have a good foundation. The key now is going to be adding players that are even above it. And so when you look at Joey Tonona, top 150 kind of guy, could end up being a top 100 recruit, could end up being, in my opinion, has the ceiling of a second, third round player. Ty Chan, he's more of that raw but high ceiling guy that I just say, I can't really go there with you to say he's a gap mover or gap closer because there's just so much work that's needed, even more so than Darren Agu, in my opinion. And part of that is just not having enough film of him because we've only seen him as a sophomore. Now, let's get into where the class is now. What does Notre Dame do? And can Notre Dame even have a gap closing offensive line class? I believe they can. And there's 4 players on the board for me that would constitute closing the gap. Now, there's some other highly ranked players on the board that I look at and I say, yeah, I know he's ranked high from a recruiting standpoint, but I don't view him as moving the needle. And Joe Bruner from Wisconsin would be an example of that. Very good player, but to me, not a needle-moving class, not a gap-closing class. So there's 4 players, in my opinion. And you look at, the obvious is Zach Rice from Virginia. Notre Dame's in his top 5. He's talked about making a visit. You've got Jake Taylor from Oklahoma or from Nevada. You've got Carson Hinsman from Wisconsin, and you've got Billy Shrout from Wisconsin. When I look at those 4 players, Notre Dame has to get any combination of 3 of those prospects. If Notre Dame can get one of the tackles, and the tackles to me are Jake Taylor, Zach Rice, if they get one of those 2 players, and then they get Hinsman and Shrouth, then I feel like this is an elite offensive line class. If they get the 3 Wisconsin kids, Hinsman, Shrouth, and then Joe Bruner, it's a really good offensive line class. But I don't think it moves the needle because I think it kind of keeps Notre Dame sort of where they've been the last couple years, which is maybe not as many elite players. And there's a difference between a Liam Eichenberg and a Ronnie Stanley and a player that maybe is a good player but not a great player like a Tommy Kramer, for example. And I think that's where Notre Dame is. I think if you get 3 of those 4 players, you're in that group. Now, the second part of that is, where does Notre Dame stand with those guys? Well, here's the latest that we've been able to gather. Zach Rice, Notre Dame's in his top 5. He's the highly ranked guy, but I believe that Notre Dame right now trails other programs. I think Ohio State, I think North Carolina, I think Alabama's in the mix. Notre Dame's going to have to get him on campus to have a shot. They are within striking distance, but they're not in that top group. If he were to make a decision today, I don't think that Notre Dame would finish in his top 3. That's just my opinion and what we're hearing kind of from our different sources on this situation. Jake Taylor, to me, it's Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and Alabama is his top 3. Oklahoma's reportedly the leader. I like where Notre Dame is at because I believe that he's the kind of kid that when he comes on the visit, Notre Dame's going to blow him away. They have to get him on campus, period. So if he goes to another school, they have to say, hey, look, if you feel like committing, this is what Notre Dame needs to do to all these kids that are visiting other schools before they visit Notre Dame. You have to say, listen, they're going to try to get you to commit. They're going to tell you they have no spots, whatever the case may be. Look, don't do it. Just come visit us first. Make all your visits, and if they want you bad enough, they'll wait for you. And if they're not willing to wait for you, then they don't want you that bad. That's what Notre Dame needs to be telling all these kids before they visit other schools. So Jake Taylor, I like where Notre Dame is at if they can get him on campus. I think he is a player that they, with a good visit, could surpass Alabama and especially Oklahoma for him. Carson Hinsman, really the 3 schools, the 2 schools that I'm most concerned with Carson Hinsman are Iowa and Wisconsin. I like where Notre Dame is placed right now. Obviously, Wisconsin's always going to be tough for in-state linemen because Wisconsin's done a great job of producing, first and second round offensive linemen. When I look at it, I see a kid to me that really likes what Notre Dame is about. Yes, the in-state attraction is there, but he's like 5-6 hours away, my understanding. He's like 5-6 hours away from Madison. He lives way up in northern Wisconsin. So, I mean, if you're going to drive to Madison, you can just easily drive to South Bend. It's not that huge of a difference when you consider where he's at. And I think Notre Dame has really attracted him. This is a recruitment where Jeff Quinn has done a really good job. I interviewed Carson Hinsman after the Under Armour camp in Ohio a few weeks ago, and he talked about how Jeff Quinn's been really on him since he was a freshman. Notre Dame has been involved with him since he was a freshman. So that is really, really early recruiting, and they've built a really strong connection. And I think they're in a good place now. It's just about finishing. That's going to be the key. As Brian Denbo says here, as Coach Freeman has said, and Mike Elson has said this, it's about getting them to say yes. And I really feel they're in a good place with those guys. And Billy Shrouth is a guy that I'm most confident in with Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has been in a great position with Billy Shrouth for a long time. Wisconsin's been working hard to try to get themselves in striking distance of Notre Dame. And I just feel really good about where Notre Dame is. I see him as a guy that if he visits in June, which I expect him to, that'd be the latest he joins the class, would be during or after his visit. I feel that's the guy, if I were to rank them in my confidence level of where Notre Dame stands, I think they stand in the best position with Shrouth. And I liked Billy Shrouth as a sophomore. He was a top 200 kind of guy for me. After watching his junior film, he went up to a top 100 guy for me. But he still is mostly an interior player. Could he play some right tackle? Sure. But I view him as more of a guard type and even plays guard in high school. So he's an interior guy, and there's a bigger need of tackles. But this is a top 100 to 150 caliber player. And it's not just me that ranks him. I believe I'd have to look at the rankings, but there was a time when he was in that 80 to 120 range from the services. I'm not sure where he's at now, but I think that's a good place for him. He's the player I'm most confident in with Notre Dame. Second is Carson Hinsman. Third is Jake Taylor. And then fourth, a distant fourth, is Zach Rice. If Notre Dame can get any three of those four players, it gives them another tackle in the class, potentially a second player that could play right tackle in a pinch. And it gives them a very strong five-man class. I think Jake Taylor's got excellent upside. I think Jake Taylor is a guy that reminds me a lot. A friend of mine actually was talking about Jake Taylor last night, and he said he reminds him of Robert Hainsey. And from a body type standpoint, I agree with that. But I think Jake Taylor's a more athletic and a longer player than Robert Hainsey, which is saying something because Robert Hainsey was an outstanding football player coming out of high school. So when I look at that, that's where I feel about that group. And so Brandon's asks, says, thoughts on Bruner compared to Shrouth and Hinsman. Why do the recruiting services have him so high? I can't speak to why they have him so high, but look, he's a good football player. Don't get me wrong. But to me, Bruner is a guy that I think eventually has to play guard in the Notre Dame offense. I think he can play tackle for Wisconsin. I think he could probably play tackle for Ohio State, but they have different systems. It's more bully ball. Notre Dame needs better athletes on the perimeter. When the way that they throw, the way that they pass protect, the way that they work to the second level, they trap, they pull. You require a little bit more athleticism to play tackle at Notre Dame than you do at Wisconsin and even Ohio State to a degree. And so that's why I don't view him quite as high. Now, again, I'll continue to evaluate him, and he could make a jump. Junior, senior film, he could make a jump, Brandon. But right now, I have him behind those other players. So those three of those four are guys that you have to get. And I look at a guy like Holden Stace. Is he a gap closer? No, because he is similar to what we talked about with Eli Raridan. He's a really good tight end. He's a top 150 to 200 caliber player with a much higher ceiling because he's still pretty raw. But Notre Dame's already an elite program at tight end. Those guys don't close the gap on other teams because there is no gap to close. Does that make sense? So when I talk about Eli Raridan and Holden Stace, what they're doing is they're maintaining. Notre Dame is in a maintenance situation when it comes to tight end recruiting. I don't view the offensive line as in maintenance. I think the offensive line has taken a little bit of a step back in recent years from that elite level of recruiting we saw from Coach Easton. So now it's up to Coach Quinn with this class to close the gap. Now, that kind of class to me would be a borderline gap erasing class. Again, we're not talking about what Notre Dame has done in the past. We're talking about where Notre Dame is right now. And that, to me, is important. And then you obviously Rocco Spindler and Blake Fisher are those type of players. I view Tosh Baker as that kind of player. He just needs more time. But then you add this big group to it. This is a great five group. If you get three of those four with Tanona and Chan, you could make a case in that situation, a strong case, I would make it, that Ty Chan is your lowest ranked of your offensive linemen. He's currently the number 208 player in the country on the composite ranking. So that's kind of where I look at it. And then Brandon brought up a name here. Emil Wagner must have some high upside if Ohio State is so high on him. He does. He has very high upside. I have some issues with his lower body and can he hold up, but he's an excellent player. Honestly, Brandon, the reason he's not on my list right now is because I think he's going to Ohio State. I don't see him as a guy that if I include him in this conversation and Notre Dame doesn't get him, it looks like a miss. Well, he goes to Wayne. The top players from Wayne go to Ohio State if Ohio State wants him. That's just the way that it works. So I don't view him as legitimate of an option. Now, if he makes it to campus and Notre Dame can pull off that win, that's great. I would probably rank him. I would not rank him as high for me as Jake Taylor or Zach Rice. So I would still say he's a good player. If I said earlier that he's a needle mover, gap closer, I'd probably take that back because I have more. He's more in that Darren Agu category. He's more in that Ty Chan category where he's going to need a lot of work. I have questions about same with George Fitzpatrick, who I like a lot. The reason I don't view George Fitzpatrick as a needle closer or gap closers because even though I love his upside, there's a lot more questions about can he get to that level because of the size and the frame. And so that's why those guys aren't part of this group. Now, if they got a Fitzpatrick or a Wagner with Shrouth and Hinsman, would that be a really good offensive line class? Yeah, it would. But would I view it as one that gets Notre Dame right back on track? No, I think they'd still be a step behind the way that a couple other programs have recruited in recent years. And so that's kind of where I view that on the offensive line side. Running back wise, look, we've talked a lot about the big three. I think if Notre Dame gets one of those three, that's closing the gap. Even though I don't have Sawchuk quite ranked quite as high as some of the services, you still add that kind of speed to your roster with Jadarian Price, with the two kids you got last year. That's excellent running back recruiting. And he would be third on my list as far as players. That's the position I'm most concerned about Notre Dame getting a gap closer in this class. Dallin Hayden, Nicholas Singleton, Gavin Sawchuk. You get one of those three guys, you've closed the gap. The rest of the players on the board are good running backs, but they're not gap closers. And doesn't mean they're not good players, they're just not gap closers. So I think you add one of those three guys, you're there. Ohio State obviously is the team to beat for Dallin Hayden, but as I've said before, if Notre Dame can convince him to ensure that he makes his visit when he's scheduled right now, that to me is a player that I view as a surefire gap closer type of player. And I think Notre Dame is in good position there if they can get him back on campus. Nick Singleton, it's Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. I think that Notre Dame, again, is very much within striking distance. I think get him back on campus. He's been on campus before, as has Dallin Hayden, as has Gavin Sawchuk. So these are three kids that have been on campus before. So I don't think the official visits are necessarily going to have the huge swing that they could with other players, but they could still be very important and will be very important for Notre Dame. So they got to get one of those three guys. I'm not quite as confident there, but I would also say that that's the position where you least need a gap closer of the positions they're still recruiting. Quarterback, obviously we can have that conversation, but they're not recruiting quarterbacks right now. So I think if they miss out at a running back, yeah, it stings, but it's like, okay, well, you've got Chris Tyree still on campus for 2 more years, 1 year for sure with this class. And then you look at the class they had last year with Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, and then Jadarian Price. Look, you recruit elite offensive lines. You don't need a first round back to be really good, and Notre Dame has proven that, right? Notre Dame's had some really, really good running games with guys who weren't high NFL draft picks. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. And then let's talk wide receiver recruiting. So as we break down the offense and we look at the gap closers on offense, to me, it's really about it's a big board, and there's really good football players on the board. But for me, I think when I look at the gap closers, there's really three guys, that I believe Notre Dame has a shot with. And they have to get 2 of those 3, but it has to be a specific 2 of those 3. And let's talk about that. So the 3 players to me that stand above the others in regards to ranking and guys that Notre Dame has a legitimate shot with. You look at Xavion Bradshaw from Virginia, CJ Williams from California, and Tobias Merriweather from Washington. Now, if you look at it and you say, well, can you get any 2 of those 3? If you get any 2 of those 3, it's a really good receiver class, but it doesn't move the needle if you get Merriweather and CJ Williams to go with Amorian Walker. And I have my doubts about that because it's not just about, let me explain why I think the 2 of the 3 has to be Bradshaw plus one of those 2. Here's what I mean by that. CJ Williams and Tobias Merriweather are both excellent players. I grade them both out as top 100 recruits. I think they both have 5-star upside. I think CJ's a little bit more ready-made right now. Tobias has the higher ceiling. They're both excellent players in my view. But you put those 2 guys with Amorian Walker and you start running into some of the same problems that Notre Dame has had in the past when they play the better teams on the schedule. And that is, who's your game breaker of that group, right? Who's the guy that you look at and say, this guy can be either that great route runner, that great speed guy, that great after-the-catch guy, that player that when you match up against those programs, going back from Percy Harvin all the way up to recent seasons of Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith and those types of players, you say, who are the guys that are just that dynamic after-the-catch, stretch-the-field guy? And I don't think that that's kind of where they are. I feel like that would give them big possession type guys that can stretch the field in some ways, sort of like a Javon McKinley, a Miles Boykin, but it would give them a lot of Miles Boykins. It wouldn't give them any Will Fullers. It wouldn't give them any Devontae Smiths. It wouldn't give them any Jalen Waddles. It wouldn't give them any any players like that. And to me, it's like that's something that they're missing. And so while that would be a really good receiver class practically from a recruiting ranking standpoint, I don't know if it gives them the blend of skill sets that they need. Because look, you guys watched the game on Saturday. You watch Oklahoma play, you watch Clemson play, you watch Ohio State play, you watch Alabama play. Most of those schools are not out there dominating with players that are 6'3", 6'4" possession guys. They have those players, but those players are also complemented by dynamic players. Now, it's not about getting a smaller guy, because when you look at Clemson's 2018 team, T. Higgins was not necessarily that kind of burner, although he was a big play guy, but he wasn't that type of dynamic after the catch guy I'm talking about either. But Justin Ross was. Even though he was bigger, he is an elite athlete, and he can be that kind of guy. When you look at Alabama, they haven't had that big player recently. They've had a bunch of great route runners and those types of things. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. They have to get Bradshaw because he is that kind of guy. Xavier Bradshaw can be that sort of take a bubble screen. Like, look, I love Tobias Merriweather as a player. Y'all know that. 5-star upside, top 100 guy. I'm taking him in a heartbeat. However, you're not throwing a bunch of bubble screens to Tobias, right? He's not going to take a look screen, a now screen behind the line. That's that screen where you just catch it and throw it, and the guy catches it behind the line, and you have to make somebody miss. He's not a guy that's going to do that and make a bunch of people miss and run for a 50-yard touchdown, right? We understand that, right? Great player, but just a different skill set. Well, C.J. Williams is sort of in a similar skill set as Tobias. He is a route runner. He's a physical guy, but he's not a guy that's going to make a ton of plays on in the screen game. Now, he can make some plays after the catch, but not to the way that like a Will Fuller could, the way that Xavier Bradshaw could, the way that I think guys like, Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys, those kind of guys. It's just a different kind of player. Bradshaw gives you that. Now, in a perfect world, if Notre Dame wants to hit, like if Dell Alexander wants to get out of everyone's doghouse, then what Dell needs to do beyond developing now Xavier Watts is go out and get Williams, Bradshaw, and Tobias Merriweather. That would be home run, because now you've got two really outstanding outside guys in an elite potential slot guy in Xavier Bradshaw. So that would be the home run, right? That would be the ultimate gap closing class for Notre Dame. But if they just get Bradshaw and then one of Williams or Merriweather, to me, that's a gap closing class. And that's where I look at the offense. And here's where I think they are. I've said this before. I think Notre Dame has to get Tobias Merriweather back on campus to really have a shot to close with him. But I've said before that that's one guy that Coach Alexander's done a good job on. Tommy Reese has been doing a good job there. Brian Kelly's been involved with him. So I like where Notre Dame is at with Tobias Merriweather. It's just they just got to close, and they have to be willing to stay in it for the long haul, because it doesn't sound like I've read a couple interviews with him from other sites. I think that one of the West Coast people at 247 did a site from him, did an article for him, and he mentioned he wants to carry this process out, talked about committing in January at one of the All-Star games. And so when I look at it and I say, that's one you got to be willing to stay in the mix for. Notre Dame hasn't done that a ton lately. They like to get the class over with. So they got to stay in it. C.J. Williams is a guy that I think they could get sooner. Xavier Bradshaw, maybe they could get sooner if they can close. I think they're in a good position with CJ. They got to get him back on campus and close. Xavier is a big wild card. I have no clue where they're at with him. They need to go after him hard, because he's the kind of guy that could really, really take things over the top for you. Now, before I get to defense, there's a couple questions up here. Brandon says, I'm actually surprised where Notre Dame stands with Sawchuck. Read yesterday that Notre Dame may be the front runner right now. Doesn't hurt. Oklahoma already has a top 5 running back committed. So that's not my read of the situation. I would not say Notre Dame is his leader right now. I think that Notre Dame is still trailing other schools. I think that Notre Dame has done a good job of closing the gap on those other schools in his particular recruitment. But I don't feel that we're in a situation where I would be comfortable saying that. Now, could the visits change that? Sure, of course. That's what recruiting is all about, right? You're not always locked into a spot. But I still feel like at this point in time, it's a situation where Notre Dame is. I would not go that far on this one. But I do think that they're in better shape today than they were a month ago. But I'm not quite there yet. So I'm going to see if we have any other questions about the offense before we start talking about the defense. And there's a DB question. We'll get to that. See here, a lot of defensive questions. Thomas Walsh. I know, Thomas, you're a little biased on this one. We know this, but in this instance, your bias is absolutely absolutely right on with there. Brandon says, I love Merriweather. I do too. Look, I've compared him a lot to T. Higgins. He's a lot like T. Higgins coming out of high school. He's not a burner. He's not a 4.41 guy. T ran I think a 4.58, 4.59, something like that at his pro day. You don't necessarily have to be an elite burner to be a big play guy. And I think Tobias is a little faster than T was coming out of high school, but I love his upside. Tom Balork says, we need some electric playmakers on offense, especially on the edge, and a special QB. Offense has to pick it up like defense has. Agree, Tom. Agree. And that's why I view – so, Tom, your sentiment is kind of where I'm coming from on the standpoint of you can't do CJ and a Walker and Merriweather because there's just not enough of that electric playmaker type. It's all vertical guys. And those type of guys, to me, are a little bit easier to game plan for when you only have them. When you have them plus that electric slot guy or a player that can do damage after the catch, can stretch the middle field, and you're loaded at tight end, that's when you start having the kind of unit as a whole that makes you really, really hard to defend. Really hard to defend. Let's see if we have any other deals here. Don't see any other offensive questions, so we're going to move on to – okay, we're going to have to get on to defense here. Connor, those guys might be gap closers, but do they have traits? I love the comment. I'm going to make a statement on that, though. I will say that what I know of – at least C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather. I don't know Xavier Bradshaw well, so I'm not commenting on him. It's out of lack of knowledge, not doubting that he has the traits. But I do feel like Tobias and C.J. would fit very well at Notre Dame. Jordan Johnson was always a bit of a different fit, but there's been a lot of great Notre Dame players over the years that weren't great fits. There's guys on the team now that aren't great fits that are successful. So I get the joke, but I do, and it's a good one. But I do believe that Notre Dame is in a position right now where those guys do, in my opinion, close the gap in a lot of ways. And if you're correct that it's a Stanford and Notre Dame battle for Merriweather, and I think that you're not. Oregon needs to be in that conversation, in my opinion. But if it is a Notre Dame and Stanford battle, then I feel really good about Notre Dame winning that battle. Absolutely. Okay. Oh, John, here's a question from John Rich before we dive into it. What grade would you give Notre Dame coaching staff to develop elite route runners from high ceiling guys? Not a very good one. I don't view them as really developing route running at all, to be honest with you. And that's why you need higher ceiling guys, because you're not teaching stems properly and you're not focusing on top ends effectively. And maybe they're changing that, but that's just, it hasn't been there in the past. Then you need more talented players. And that's why, Chase Claypool could get away and be dominant, even though he was a pretty sloppy route runner. And that's one area where he improved greatly as a rookie. Grant Goodrich asks, is Notre Dame still going after Caden Saunders? I understand that they're probably still talking to him, but he's not a guy that's in this conversation. And honestly, I like Xavier Bradshaw more than Caden Saunders. And I've said that for a while. Okay, so let's move on to Notre Dame defensive recruiting. And let's look at it like this. This is where Notre Dame has struggled more in the last two classes. They haven't landed a whole lot of gap closers. They're off to a great start already. I think you can make an argument that all 6 of the current defensive commitments are either gap closers individually or part of a group that closes the gap. And so it's a great start. But now it's about how do you finish? And when you look at the 3-man defensive end class, you look at Tyson Ford, Aiden Gabera, Darren Agu, it's a great defensive end class. Well, what's a better way to make it even better? Go get Cyrus Moss. Cyrus Moss is absolutely gap closer. Notre Dame is in his top 5. Talked to a friend of mine recently who has talked to him recently, and he likes Notre Dame a lot. There's a lot of interest from Cyrus Moss and the family in Notre Dame. I think there's some concern in his view, an understandable concern about the fact that Notre Dame already has 3 defensive end commitments. Well, this past weekend just gave Mike Elston the best recruiting pitch he can give. He can simply walk up to the kid and say, hey, Cyrus, we signed 4 defensive ends in the 2016 class. We signed Julian Aguara. We signed Dalen Hayes. We signed Khalid Kareem. We signed Adi Ogundiji. Okay? You're a better prospect than all of them at the same age. All 4 of those guys just got drafted in the last 2 years. All 4 of them. You come play for me, I can take a 4-man defensive class, play them all together, play them, they're all going to play. They're all going to get a chance to be productive, and I can send all of you to the NFL. How do I know I can do that? I just did it. That's what we've talked about all these years is a big part of selling recruiting is, can you prove to kids that you can get in the NFL? And then when you say to Cyrus, like, hey, look, man, you're a 5-star. You're ranked much higher than Khalid was coming out of high school. Dalen was considered a 5-star by one service, but Dalen didn't play a lot of high school football, and Dalen was more of a linebacker. We had to turn him into a defensive end. Ogundiji was a 3-star kid we flipped from Western Michigan, and Khalid Kareem wasn't even a top 200 recruit. So, that's a great sales pitch for Mike Elston. So, hey, don't worry about being a fourth man in the defensive end class, because I've already shown I can get all 4 of y'all in the NFL. And we've talked about this. This group, to me, as a recruiting class, if they get Cyrus Moss, would be better than the 2016 defensive end class. So Cyrus Moss is gap closer number 1. Next for me is arguably the most important gap closer in the entire class. I think you could make a strong case that there's not a player more important to Notre Dame in this class than Anthony Lucas from Arizona. And why I say that is, you've started to really upgrade your defensive tackle recruiting in the last 3-4 years. You got Gabriel Rubio last year, who I graded as a top 100 recruit. You got Aiden Keanaaina and Riley Mills. I think Riley Mills has a chance to be a really outstanding player. Jason Adamiola, outstanding player, but he was kind of outside the time frame we've looked at. I think Anthony Lucas would be the best defensive tackle commit Notre Dame has signed under Brian Kelly. I think he's got that kind of talent. I think he also fits incredibly well with what Notre Dame does defensively. So you're talking high-level talent, high-character young man. I've never spoken to him, but I've talked to people that know him. Supposedly he's a high-character kid. Academics are important to him and his family, which is always a thing. That doesn't mean they're going to go to an academic school, but it's going to be a check in Notre Dame's box. And then when you look at Notre Dame's success recently in developing off defensive linemen, again, this is what Mike Elston can say. Look at what we did on defense the last 3 years, and I did that with a couple guys that were 3-star recruits coming out of high school, that being Myron Tungavaloa and Kurt Heinisch. What am I going to do with a guy like you? And look at all the ends that we're recruiting. Teams can't double you because they got to worry about Tyson Ford, and they got to worry about Aiden Gubera. They got to worry about Darren Agu. They got to worry about Jordan Patelho, Isaiah Foskey, all those kind of guys. And you don't have to play 1 million snaps a game because we've got Jason Onye, and we've recruited Aiden Keanaaina and Riley Mills and Gabriel Rubio. And you put Notre Dame in a situation where in a 3-year stretch, you've landed Riley Mills, Aiden Keanaaina, Gabriel Rubio. I think Jason Onye might end up inside, and Anthony Lucas in a 3-year stretch. That is absolutely needle moving. And when you bring a guy like Lucas in, he's an elite prospect. Now, I have felt for a long time that Notre Dame is in a much better place with Anthony Lucas than people think. I think Notre Dame, if I had to say right now, I would say if he came out with a top 3 right now, do I think Notre Dame would make it? Yes, I do. Are they his number 1? I don't know if he has one, to be honest with you. I think Notre Dame is within striking distance. They've got to get him on campus. They've got to put the full court press on him. They've got to talk to him consistently. It's got to be Elston. It's got to be the GAs. It's got to be Freeman. It's got to be Kelly. It's got to be Polian. I'd get Tommy Reese to call him. I'm serious. Like, he's that important. Hey, look, man, we're trying to win something here, but my offense needs help from the defense, and you'd make our defense elite. I don't care who you have to do. You get everybody to call him. Do everything you can within the rules to get Anthony Lucas, because he, to me, is the difference maker. And here's why. If you're elite up front, it makes everything else better. Just That'll never change in football. I don't care how many scheme changes or philosophical changes. If you're elite up front, you're going to have a chance to have an elite defense, and it makes everybody behind that front better. Defensive end, they're doing it. Defensive tackle, he could be that thing that puts them over the edge in that regards. So I really believe that he is a guy that could be the ultimate gap closer for this defense. And you could argue that he could be the biggest gap closer for this entire team. Now, his ranking's a little all over the place. I think Rivals has him as a top 30 player. Another outlet has him outside the top 200, I believe. He is a top 50 player. He's a borderline 5-star player. So when I look at the defensive line class, Cyrus Moss, Anthony Lucas, those two guys are vitally important. Moss is every bit as good as Lucas, in my opinion, but they've already recruited well there. Lucas is a guy that they don't have right now. If you can get both of them, good luck finding another team, in my opinion, that's landing better players. And along that, we ask question, better than Tillery? Roderick Blackman asks, is he better than Tillery? Absolutely. Now, keep in mind, Jerry Tillery was not recruited to play defensive line. He was recruited by Harry Hiestand. So he is actually in the Harry Hiestand category of guys that were recruited to Notre Dame that became first-round picks, because Notre Dame recruited him to play offensive tackle. Jerry decided late in the process, after the Army All-American game, sort of around that time, but really ultimately afterwards, that he was going to play defensive line. And LSU was trying to use that to flip him to LSU, and it ended up not helping or not ultimately working. And so Jerry ended up being a defensive tackle. But Jerry was not an elite 5-star defensive tackle. And really, Jerry didn't become a great player until his senior year. Anthony Lucas, to me, is a surefire show up day one and be an impact player. That's how good I think he can be. Now, I'm not going to maybe necessarily put that kind of pressure on him, but that to me is where I view him. So I really feel good about where Notre Dame is with Anthony Lucas, but he is to me a difference maker type of player that could really, really change Notre Dame's fortunes. We got asked a question about Anthony. We'll address it here before we move on. Well, John Climax says, I think landing Lucas would help with recruiting Moss. It wouldn't hurt. It certainly wouldn't hurt. Hey, come, let's be part of the best defensive line class in the country. Come join me. D-Rock says, besides Notre Dame, what are two schools that might contend for Lucas? Well, he's got a top 5. His top 5 includes Alabama, Oregon, Texas, and Texas A&M. The two schools that I'm most concerned with are Texas and Alabama. Those are the two schools that I would have. That's something I would be a little bit concerned with. So let's continue on with the defensive line class. And Thomas, I'm going to answer the question that you just asked here at the end. But the front 7, those are the two guys for me. That's it. Now, because you have the other 3 ends in the class, you can focus a lot of your attention on them. Let's talk about linebacker. Now, linebacker is a position group where I think that I'm going to look at it together, sort of like I did the offensive line, simply because it's partly of a group, but it's also about I view this Notre Dame linebacker class is off to a great start with Josh Burnham and Nolan Ziegler. I grade Josh Burnham out as a top 100 kind of player. He's got 5-star upside, in my opinion. My question is where's he going to play? That's my only concern with Josh Burnham is, and not even concern. I shouldn't even say concern because it's not a concern. So my question is ultimately, does he play Mike? Does he play Will? Is he a Sam if they go to a pure 3-3? Is he maybe grows into a Viper if they go into sort of a hybrid 3-3 with a guy that you can want to be able to play on the edge and drop it to linebacker? So that is a question that I have right now with that. So I want to see where he ends up. And then that could impact, as we talked about the other day, who's the next 2 that you get. So here's where I'm at with linebacker recruiting. Right now, there's 3 linebackers left on the board. There's Junior Tuihalamaka, there's Jalen Sneed, and there's Sebastian Cheeks. What Notre Dame has to decide is, where's Josh Burnham going to play? Ideally. And then base that off of who are your next 2 that you take. Now, this is a position where if you get 2 of those 3 players, Junior Tuihalamaka, Sebastian Cheeks, and Jalen Sneed, if you get 2 of those 3, you have an elite linebacker class. You have not only the best linebacker class Notre Dame has signed, I would argue, in 20 years. And if somebody can remember a class in that 20 years at linebacker that was better, not that had a better individual player, so don't say like 2013 with Jalen Smith. I'm talking about as a class. Jalen Smith and Manti were obviously elite players. They grade out higher than anybody in this class. But I'm talking about as a unit, This is an elite group. You get 2 of those 3. And again, Junior Tuihalamaka, Jalen Sneed, and Sebastian Cheeks. That's how I would rank them from a ranking right now. And I would rank Junior first because Junior has a higher floor. From an upside standpoint, it's Sneed, Cheeks, and Junior is how I'd rank it. If you view Josh Burnham as a Will or a Viper, maybe a potential Viper hybrid player, then I think you have to get Junior Tuihalamaka. If you think that Burnham could play Mike and that might ultimately be his position, and you want to go Sneed and you want to go Cheeks, I'm good with that too. We could have a debate, and we could have a whole show of a debate about who's better, Junior Tuihalamaka, Jalen Sneed, or Sebastian Cheeks. And a lot of different people would have different opinions, but here's what I think about it as a group. They're all 3 outstanding players. Sebastian Cheeks has the least amount of experience simply because of an injury as a sophomore and then something out of control as a junior, which is his state canceled football in the fall, played a shortened season in the spring. He just hasn't played a lot of football, but the tools are there. And here's where they are with a recruiting standpoint. I think you could make a case that Notre Dame is the leader for all 3 of those guys. I feel most confident right now that Notre Dame will land Jalen Sneed and Sebastian Cheeks. I feel really good about Notre Dame as we're both of those. I'd be willing to say now, based on my latest intel, that they lead for both of those. I think you could make a case that they lead for Junior Tuihalamaka, but I think there's other schools that are it'd be more like 1A, 1B, 1C. I think Notre Dame's in a good place there. I think Texas is recruiting him really hard. They're doing a great job with him. That's a school I've been talking about for a while with him. So the question is, how do you handle this if you're Notre Dame? If you like Tuihalamaka more, is there a gap between him and the other 2 to the point where you'd push off one of those other 2 or to wait for him? Or do you just say, hey, look, we got 3 guys. We're going to take the first 2 that want to come. I think the fact that you landed Josh Burnham, if you're Notre Dame, puts Notre Dame in a situation where they don't have to wait. I think they could decide that, hey, look, we like him at Mike, so we'll take those other 2. Or maybe we don't like him at Mike, but we're going to be comfortable starting him at Mike because of what we have in these other 2 players. So for me, it would be I look at it as a situation as, okay, we have 2 spots and 3 guys. What do you all want to do? And I think Notre Dame's in a great place where they could actually push the buttons of those 3 players to find out who really likes us the most and say, hey, look, you can wait till June. You can go through all your 5 visits, and we respect that. You got to do what you got to do, but we're not going to have room. By the end of June, we're going to be full. So if you really want to be in this class, it's time for you to go public and be a part of what you're doing. So I think that's where Notre Dame is at when it comes to front 7 recruiting. Secondary recruiting is a little bit of a situation where I don't see a lot of gap closers that are either on the board or that Notre Dame has a great shot with. And I would really only say 2 right now for me. Number 1 is easy, Xavier Nwankpa. He's a gap closer. He, to me, is a 5-star caliber player. He's a top 50 recruit in my view. He was very close on my grade to getting a 5-star grade, which means he's more in that top 25 range than he is the 50 range. He is, to me, would be the second best safety Notre Dame has signed behind Kyle Hamilton. And the distance between him and Kyle Hamilton as juniors is like that. It is not big at all. But the reality is Ohio State is the clear front runner for him. Now, Ohio State just picked up a safety commitment from Kai Stokes from Florida recently that Notre Dame offered that I actually thought Notre Dame had a really good shot with because he's a very high academic kid, but that's how the Buckeyes roll at this point in time. Xavier Nwankpa could be certainly a needle mover, a big-time gap closer for Notre Dame. I just don't think right now they're necessarily in position where I'd feel great about saying they got a legitimate shot. I believe, I could be wrong on this, I believe he's going to visit Ohio State before he visits Notre Dame, I believe. If that's the case, that would make me nervous. If they can get out of that visit with him not committing, then maybe they'll have a puncher's chance at getting him. But I think right now they're on the outside looking in. Guys like Jake Pope, KJ Winston, those are good football players, especially Jake Pope. But they're more of you're getting caught up from misses than they are necessarily getting you caught up and then taking you to that next level. Could Notre Dame have a really good safety class this year without it being a needle-moving class? Sure, absolutely. And you don't have to have gap closers at every position. You don't. That's why it's so important you get them up front in the front seven, because if you get them in the front seven, then now all of a sudden those really good safeties become impactful safeties because of how good everything is in front of them. The other player that's still on the board that I would view as a gap closer is Devin Moore from Naples, Florida. And here's why I say that. It is difficult to find a guy that legitimately grades out as in my view, a top 100 caliber player at 4 different positions in your defense. And that's why I think Devin Moore fits that category. He is in that second category of gap closers in that he may not be an elite top 50 player, but he's a top 100 to 150 guy that, to me, takes the group that you have now and makes them a lot better. And that's the other part of the gap closer. And the reason I say that is, number one, he's talented. But number two, I think he's got traits that could fit at boundary corner. I think he's got traits that could fit at field corner. And in those two areas, he's a lot like Ryan Barnes. And y'all know how much I loved Ryan Barnes. But I think he also could fit in as the slot corner in a true 5 secondary lineup, which is traditionally what Marcus Freeman has done in the past. His quote unquote, rover, and when they've gone 4 down, has been more of a DB. They had 3 their rover at Cincinnati was a third linebacker because they were a 3-down defense. When they would go to a 4-down defense, they'd take a linebacker off the field and put a DB or defensive lineman. They didn't take a DB off the field and keep the rover out. They would have their rover, and then they'd take a linebacker out, one of the inside linebackers out, but then they'd still have that nickel player. That was their 5th DB. I think Devin Moore could play that at a high level, maybe even better than the 2 outside spots. But I also think he could be a really good free safety. And so far on this film, that's where I've liked him the best. But he definitely would be a guy I'd give a shot at corner. I really like his upside more at safety. They were recruiting him initially at safety. They're now recruiting him as a corner. But the understanding that, hey, dude, you can play all 4 positions. You can play anywhere. The reason they like Devin Moore is they may try him out at field corner, boundary, wherever, but he's a guy that say, okay, we have a need there. We have a need there. We have a need there. Let's figure out where we're going to put Devin Moore. There aren't a lot of guys like that. And so that's why I put Devin Moore in that category. I think Notre Dame is in a really good place with him. I'm not ready to say that they're going to get him. They've got to get him on campus. They've got to close the deal. But I think they've put themselves within striking distance, absolutely, with Devin Moore. So that's kind of where I view them. That's how I view them right now with the defensive class. I'm a lot more confident that they're going to get some of these gap closers on defense than I am on offense. But I'll also say this. I'm a lot more confident today when it comes to offensive recruiting than I was a month ago. And that's a positive. You want to be trending in the right direction. You're not going to always eat up that space in a day. You look at a guy like Tobias Merriweather. Let's say you were behind 3 or 4 other schools a couple months ago. You don't have to pass all 4 of them in a week. You have to slowly keep chipping away, keep chipping away, keep chipping away. The guys you got to pass closely are the guys that are getting close to decision-making mode. But I feel like Notre Dame has put themselves in position. So to wrap up, receiver, we talked about you've got to get 2 of 3 of. You got to get Bradshaw, and you got to get 1 of Williams or Merriweather. If you get all 3, grand slam home run. You need 1 of the big 3 running back. You need 3 of 4 guys on my board at offensive line, which is Jake Taylor, Zach Rice, Carson Hinsman, and Billy Shrout. You get 3 of those 4 to go with Chan and Tanona, gap closing class there. Look at defensive class. Already have a great defensive end class. Be awesome. I mean, elite special. Nobody's going to be better if you can also add Cyrus Moss. Anthony Lucas could be arguably the biggest gap closer in the entire class, most important gap closer in the entire class, like where Notre Dame is there. I think he is a guy that they're in a very good place with. I feel most confident that Notre Dame is going to have an elite linebacker class. I think if Notre Dame gets 2 of Junior Tuihalamaka, and my understanding is they're going to take 4 linebackers. That's my understanding. If you get 2 of Tuihalamaka, Sneed, and Cheeks, that's an elite. I don't see anybody having a better linebacker class, in my view. And I've watched 40 of the top linebackers this year, and I'm telling you, it's going to be almost impossible for anybody to have a better foursome than the one Notre Dame has, if they get 2 of those 3. And then the back end, Xavier Nwankpa, Devin Moore are the keys. Now, there are other players like Benjamin Morrison that are really good prospects that solidify what you're doing in the secondary, but I don't necessarily view them as gap closers in the traditional sense. So that's where I'm at with them. And before we wrap up, I'm going to go back up here and answer some questions that were geared more towards the defense. And let's see, which DB targets in the 22 class that Notre Dame is notably in the mix are gap closers besides Nwak? But I've answered that. Brandon, what I'm curious about is, do you see any other guys besides Devin Moore that Notre Dame is on the board with? I would like to hear some of y'all's opinions on this. This is me. I've given you my opinion, right? Now let me hear yours. What do you all think? Brandon says, without securing any 5-star prospects, I see Notre Dame landing the 7th to 8th ranked class in 2022. I would say that's probably accurate from a recruiting ranking standpoint. But Brandon, as you know, I don't care about that. I think you can land a class that's not ranked there, that if you remove some of the regional bias from some of these rankings, you say, okay, yeah, they're ranked 8th, for example, but take 7 the teams ahead of them, and you tell me how many of those classes you would trade Notre Dame's class for. And if they can hit like 75%, which is a challenge on the gap closers I just talked about, and then fill out with guys like Benjamin Morrison and players like that, then yeah, Jake Pope, then this class is going to be special. It's going to be arguably Notre Dame's best. Is Notre Dame recruiting anyone on that Aaron Lynch level on the defensive line? Not yet, but I don't know if I've seen a defensive end in this class that for anybody that is as good as Aaron Lynch was coming out of high school. So realist, I mean, I could say no to that, but number one, I think we would agree that a great defensive line is more than just one great player. It's about being good across the board. That's what's made Notre Dame better. I would argue that the 3 guys that they've landed are needle movers and gap closers, in that they're going to be better than they've been because they've recruited so well in this 22 class. But are there any guys that I would view as, 5-star, surefire Aaron Lynch, if he has his head on straight, a top 10 NFL draft pick? No, I don't think there is. But honestly, I don't know if there is that guy in this class at defensive end. And there's Walter Nolan. I mean, do you view him as a defensive end? But that's kind of where I'm at with that. See if we have any other defensive questions. Tommy Leonard, no chance of BK pulling off the Teo with Hamilton. No. Teo was a borderline first-round pick. That's why he came back. It wasn't just about that. It was also draft positioning. If Kyle Hamilton has a kind of progress I think he's going to make this year, he's going to be a top 10 to 15 pick, which is rare for a safety. Let's see here. See any other defensive questions before we move on? Mule Skinner says we need our 4-star recruits to turn into 5-star players. I mean, it's not just 4-star recruits, it's 3-star recruits. Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was a 3-star recruit. He played like a 5-star. We've seen that quite a bit. Any other defensive questions? Okay, so how would you feel about a class of Mickey, Morris, and Moore? I'm not sure who Morris is. So I'm going to pull up my offer list because maybe I'm just drawing a blank here. But I'm not sure who Morris is. So I'm looking at the 2020 offers. I'm sorry, but I'm like completely drawing a blank on who Morris is. I apologize. I'm going to pull this up here. Here's the 22 commitments. And I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. Are you talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about Morrison, Jay? I apologize. If you're talking about Morrison, how would I feel about a class of Mickey, Morrison, and Moore? I'd love that. That is in my opinion, that would be a needle moving class for Notre Dame in the second version of what that means. Is there an elite Kamari Rogers in that group? No. Is that a group that to me takes Notre Dame from being right here and Alabama's right here, and then now Notre Dame is here? Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. And then when you combine it with what that group is like next, then yes. So I apologize. I was just drawing a blank on who Morris was. But if you're talking about Benjamin Morrison, if that's who you're talking about, then yes, I would view that. I would view that as a gap closing class. Now, not in the traditional sense that the gap has been erased. Kamari Rogers could have been a gap eraser. These guys are gap closers. Let's see if we have any more questions before we move on. Let's see here. John Climax says, do you think the misses in the past couple of years are now catching up to Notre Dame in regards to recruiting? John, could you elaborate on what you mean by that? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. And I want to make sure I answer your question correctly. John DeCrisio, I hope I'm saying that right. It says, my favorite two receivers in the last 20 years are Golden Tate and Will Fuller, both very explosive. Yes, absolutely. And Notre Dame needs that kind of guy. Michael Floyd's are great. I have been in arguments with Tim O'Malley where I felt like Michael Floyd was a better college receiver than Golden Tate. But he wasn't an explosive guy. And I think in today's offense, you need that. In today's game of football, you need that. You need guys that can be the before and after the catch game changers. And if Tommy Rees is going to continue making the changes that I believe he's making, then you definitely need to emphasize those guys. So you can say, well, we're going to get, Williams and Morrison both rank higher than Bradshaw. Okay, even if they do, but the skill set, again, this isn't about, okay, what does Notre Dame need to do to close on Alabama and Clemson in recruiting rankings? I don't care about that. I care about what they do on the field. And on the field, you need to make sure that you're building the kind of complete roster that allows you to go play. Not if you recruit 3 guys that are elite players and they only can play one position, it doesn't make you a better team. If you have the number 1 quarterback in the country 3 straight years, well, you're not playing all 3 of them, right? You're playing one. And so to me, that's different than saying you got to build your roster to where you've got players that complement each other from a skill set standpoint. And when I look at that, that is where I view this receiving class. It's not just about landing the high-ranked guys. It's about building the class in a way that makes the unit be explosive to where when they actually play games against Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, the receiving unit is built in a way that you have the complementary skill sets. And I've explained this before. If you have just big guys, there's going to be some of those teams that can match up against you. Ohio State recruits corners that can match up against you. Clemson has recruited corners, as we saw in 2018, that can match up against you. When you have a combination of players, some big, some small, you think of the 2016 Clemson team. They had Mike Williams, who was a big beast, and then they had smaller guys like Ray McLeod, but then Hunter Renfro, completely different player from the other guys. They had the other player, and I'm drawing a blank on him now. He averaged like 9-10 yards a catch, but he was just that kind of chain mover type of player in the slot. And you need that complementary skill set. It's very, very important to do that, in my opinion. Let's see if there's any other questions. Notre Dame 2164. I love Jaden Sneed myself. Yeah, he's got, to me, probably the highest ceiling of all the linebackers. And he's a very versatile guy as much. 2164 also asks, why have we had such a hard time recruiting secondary talent? I think a lot of it's geography. The Midwest just doesn't produce a lot of those types of players. And I think part of it too is Notre Dame doesn't have a history of being able to take those players and turning them into high-level draft picks. That matters. Look, I'm going to tell you right now, if Mike Mickens takes Barnes or Riley or JoJo or Cam Hart or anybody like that and turns them into a first-round pick, maybe another guy becomes a second or third round pick, all of a sudden Mike Mickens is going to be able to go into rooms and say, hey, look, yeah, you can go to LSU, you can go to Ohio State, but why don't you come here? You talk to these recruits, why do they keep talking about LSU? Oh, DBU. Look what they do in the NFL. Ohio State, same thing. Look at how many kids. I mean, if you're a defensive end and you're saying, okay, I want to be a first-round draft pick, you go look at what Ohio State's done in the last 5 years, say, yeah, okay, if I start at Ohio State, I'm probably going to be a first-round draft pick. It's like Notre Dame with offensive linemen. Right? Why does Notre Dame have such success recruiting offensive linemen and tight ends? Because they've proven that they can put those guys in the NFL. Notre Dame hasn't done that. Even a few years ago when Notre Dame had a unanimous All-American, I believe Julian Love was a unanimous All-American, you had this great player in college. It was a 4th-round draft pick, right? The other corner, Troy Pride, great player in college, in my opinion. Really good player. I shouldn't say great. Really good player in college. 4th-round draft pick. So you can go to Notre Dame and maybe be a 4th-round draft pick, or Nick McLeod goes undrafted, or you can go to Ohio State and become a 1st-round pick, or LSU and become a 1st or 2nd-round pick. You know what I mean? So the geography combined with that, to me, is why I look at it and say that's important. And if we're being honest, I think that the academic pitch is going to probably be least effective with those kind of players. And what I mean by that is this. It's not that they don't want to go to school. It's not that. It's that most corners, elite corners that I know that I've met, view themselves as 3-year players. Most 3-year players aren't thinking about their degree because, again, what is the number one reason a great football player is going to college? Get the NFL. And people can say, well, they don't care about grades. Look, here's the deal. If you're a student and you're not an athlete and you're a student, you're going to look at the schools and you're going to say, I want to be an engineer. What schools have the greatest success at placement, job placement, and then average salary? So if you go to these 5 schools, say, hey, look, I don't care where you're ranked or whatever, but this school's number 1 in the country in job placement. So X percentage of graduates get jobs, and they rank number 1 in regards to the jobs you get, you're making at the highest level of coming out of college. Isn't that what you go to college for? Is to be able to be built up in what your chosen profession is. But when a guy does that for athletics, it's, he doesn't care. He's dumb. He doesn't care about grades. Well, some guys are like that, but not all are. It's like, yes, I care about academics, but my gift and my skill is playing football. So I'm going to go to a school that I know has proven that they can develop me into the number 1 player. If you get accepted to Notre Dame and your local community college has a professor that says, hey, look, you need to come here because I know I can get you there. So, well, you may, but I'm going to Notre Dame because they proved to me that they can get me there. And it's the same thing with football. And so I think that's a big part of it is they're going to have to start producing some of these players if they want to get to that level. See if you have any other questions here before we wrap up. Michael Katrositz. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry, Michael. Please tell me how to pronounce your name because I want to make sure I get that right. Great show, Coach. One question. What is the chatter on Angeli helping with recruiting? So far, Steve Angeli has been grinding on the recruiting trail. He's putting in a lot of work from everyone we talked to. Eric Rudder just interviewed him recently, and he's talked to other kids too. And not only does Steve tell him who he's recruiting, but other players say the same thing. Like, oh, yeah, I've talked to Angeli. So he is putting in a lot of work. Tony Stengel says, great show. Love you guys. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate you listening. Haven't heard a lot about safety recruiting. Are they focusing more on 2023 safety recruits? No, it's not that, Tony. It's not a great year at safety. I think a lot of guys they view as potential safeties are guys that either want to play another position or are guys that they're more swing guys, like a Jake Pope, Devin Moore, Jaden Mangum wants to play receiver. I view it as it's because it's not a great safety class and there just aren't a lot of guys right now that are pure safeties. There's just not a lot of talk, but there's safeties they're in on. I mean, there's definitely guys that they're recruiting and that they're in on. We've talked about Xavier Nwankpa is a guy that they're trying to recruit. Obviously we talked today about Jake Pope. We talked about potentially Devin Moore if he is able to, he could end up being a corner, but he's kind of a hybrid guy. KJ Winston from Maryland is the guy that they're trying to recruit. Sherrod Colville is the guy they're trying to recruit. So there's plenty of guys on the board, Tony. It's just right now they're just not in as great of a position with those players as they are as others. I also like the fact that they are getting involved in 2023 guys. And so I think you can make a case that this may be a decent year to only take maybe 1 pure safety because you got 2 last year and then take more of those swing corner type of guys and Jake Pope and Devin Moore and guys like that and say, hey, maybe we try them at corner first, but then we know that they could play another position. Or maybe you've got a couple guys on campus already or that you've signed and say, hey, look, this guy's a corner now, but we want to move him to safety because we think he could be great there. And so then we'll recruit more corners, even though it looks like you signed 4 last year. Maybe some of those guys are targeted other places. So I think that that could probably be part of it as well. All right, so here we go. Last couple questions. Brandon asks, what are the coaching staff saying about Pope that the recruiting services are not what makes him elite special? I've never said he's an elite player. I think he's a very athletic player. Look, I will never tell you what the services are saying or not saying. I don't know. I don't talk to them. I don't ask them questions. They don't ask me questions. I have no idea. I have no idea. And so, I mean, just to me, I know what I see. And what I see is a kid that's very athletic. I see a kid that's very instinctive. I see a kid that understands how to make plays on the ball. I see a kid that's versatile, could play receiver in college, could play corner in college, could play safety in college. I don't know. People ask me the same thing. When I ranked Kyle Hamilton as a 5-star player as a sophomore, as a junior, and everybody else had him ranked as a 3-star. So, well, what are you saying? That I don't know. I can't tell you what they're saying or not saying. I just know what the tape tells me. Now, eventually, 247 figured it out, and they had Kyle ranked as a 5-star. Others did not, but I think we all view it. So, I'm not sure here. How can I diss on Samardzija? All he did was catch everything. Had to say it. Look, Jeff Samardzija is a really good football player. He wasn't as good as Golden Tate and Michael Floyd, in my opinion. I thought Mo Stovall was a heck of a football player. But to me, that was it. But I never said anything about Jeff Samardzija. I love Jeff Samardzija. Let's see here. And I know it's difficult, but that is the proper spelling of Jeff Samardzija. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so Katrosits. Okay, thank you very much. I will definitely try to get that going. All right, here we go. Okay, so I had a couple questions here about the mug. So I've been drinking out of my Irish Breakdown mug. I also have a couple other things coming. And so I had people ask me about the mug and then also where we are at the merch store. So here's the latest on the merch store. So I believe I found 2 places that I want to be able to do sort of on-demand printing and shipping to you, people that may want to buy stuff. And what I did right now is I just went and purchased several items. I'm working through them right now on being able to make sure the designs are done correctly so that the hats look like this and don't look bad. So we're trying to figure that out. And once we get that done, they're going to send me stuff. Clearly, they've already sent me the mug, which I'm using. I bought one for myself and my wife. I'm buying a kind of a water bottle type thing, a tumbler for Vince, because Vince likes to drink. You can see him with the Gatorade thing. And then, of course, we've got some other stuff coming. So when they send it to me, the reason I'm buying it first is because I want to make sure that the quality is good. I don't want y'all to be spending your hard-earned money on junk. I mean, that's just where I'm at. So when I feel better about, okay, this is good quality, and then we can figure out good pricing, so that way we're not charging an arm and a leg. I don't want it to be like walking into the Notre Dame bookstore. Then we'll go live. My wife actually runs a business, a graphic design business. She actually builds websites. And so she is actually working on creating my store. Once I get the merchandise aspect of it, she's going to then link it to my store, and then we'll go live. And the mug will be a part of it. I really like the mug, so I think it looks good and it works. And it's a 15-ounce mug too, so I really like it. So that's kind of where we're at with that stuff. So, and then, yes, the hats that I've gone with. So my hat is fitted that I have on the show, but the hats that I'll be selling, I'll have 2 different kinds. I'll have one that's a snapback. So the trucker hat that's like this color-wise with the white and the blue will be a snapback. I also have another hat that's just navy blue with the logo, same logo, that will be fitted. So there will be options to get one or the other. I personally like fitted hats more. Other people like snapbacks more. And so we'll have both of those as options. But again, I'm still working on having them send me new hats because I want to make sure that the quality is up to par, and that if you guys are getting Irish Breakdown products, that it's, with the logo on it, that it's going to be good stuff. So that's where we're at. So that is today's show. I appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody being part of the show today. It's a really interesting time for Notre Dame, because I feel like when you look at this 2022 recruiting class, I look at it and I say Notre Dame's in a similar place they've been in the past in regards to, there's a lot of talented players on the board, but I feel like the success they've had on the field 2 last 3 years, combined with the draft success that they've had recently, really gives them an opportunity, in my opinion, where I feel better about them able to close. Notre Dame's always involved with top players. It's just to finish 3rd, 4th, or 5th with those guys. I'm more confident than I've been in a long time that they're going to close on these guys, even some of the offensive guys, although I'm more confident right now on defense, but even some of the offensive guys. And I've been pleasantly surprised at Tommy Rees's grinding on the recruiting trail, especially when you consider, young guy hasn't recruited a whole lot. I mean, he's only been a coach for 4 years. So, I mean, he is, to me, picked up real well. I mean, he is – kids like him. They engage with him. So I think he's done a good job. They have to still close, but I like where they're at. I think that Notre Dame is in a place where I'm more confident that when we get to February, that I'm more confident this is going to be a legitimate top 5 caliber class than I have for a long time. I don't know if it's going to finish that way on the recruiting services, but as y'all know, I don't care. I care about, do I look at it and view it that way? And that's where I'm at right now. Adam says, Brian Driscoll, you're awesome. Love listening to you. And I really enjoy doing the shows. I thank all of y'all for being with me. If you're in the show, you're watching it, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button to our channel. Hit the notification bell. If you're listening on our podcast, make sure that you subscribe to where we are. Leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate it. We're definitely going to continue doing this. We're going to try to do it on a daily basis during the week. Tomorrow, we're going to have a show during the afternoon with Vince. And then tomorrow night, we're going to have a recruiting show. Still trying to figure out what the topic is going to be. Tomorrow with Vince, we're going to talk about the NFL draft. And we're going to talk about Vince's impression of the blue gold game and what he saw from the blue gold game. And even though he wasn't on our show on Saturday, they did sweep their doubleheader. They actually ruled their opponent in a doubleheader. So it was a really good day for Vince, and it was worth him not being able to be part of the show because his team had a great day. So appreciate everybody talking about it. Brandon, we're going to talk about 2023 quarterbacks. I'm targeting next Wednesday as being the day for that. I really want to scour the film. I want to talk to some people, see who they're talking to for sure. Who are the guys? I definitely know that we know who they've offered, but who are the guys they're talking to? Who are the next level guys? Who are the names that people need to start knowing? And so we'll talk about that. So that'll be next Wednesday's show. I'm still trying to figure out what we're going to talk about recruiting-wise this week. May talk some offensive linemen, but we'll watch some film. We'll talk about recruiting a little bit on Wednesday night, and we'll dive into it, and we'll keep going that way. So thanks, everybody, for being with us today. And everybody have a great rest of your day. It's Tuesday. I don't know what the weather's like where you are. It's a little chilly in South Bend, but still good day, great day. Going to get a lot of work done. Hope all of y'all stay safe, have great days, and we will talk to all of you again very, very soon.